Take a look at futures this morning. We've got a rally underway for stocks. Take a look. Dow Industrials right now up 161. The Nasdaq's up 149, and the S&P higher by 32. Interest rates are pulling back this morning fractionally. Take a look at the 10-year Treasury yield this morning, down about 3 basis points, sitting at a level of 4.600, even. 4.6%. The Federal Reserve, of course, leaving interest rates unchanged yesterday for the 6th straight meeting, acknowledging a, quote, lack of progress in getting inflation back down to the 2% target, extending its, quote, wait-and-see stance on rate cuts. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank and the Bank of England both preparing to cut rates this year as well. Here's Chairman Jay Powell comparing the rate cut pace in the U.S. to global banks.
The difference between the United States and other countries that are now considering rate cuts is that they're just not having the kind of growth we're having. Their inflation is performing about like ours or maybe a little better. We actually have the luxury of having strong growth and a strong labor market, very low unemployment, high job creation. We can be patient, and we'll be careful and cautious as we approach the decision to cut rates, whereas I think other jurisdictions may go before that. In terms of the implications,
joining me right now is former World Bank president, Purdue University distinguished fellow, and Wall Street Journal contributor David Malpass. David, great to see you. Jay Powell's going on and on about this strong growth. We just had the GDP. It was 1.6% in the first quarter.
And it's projected to be not strong in the future either. It's from the Fed standpoint, they keep saying this idea that if they could only get the economy to be slower, inflation would come down. I'm not sure it works that way. You need the economy to produce more so that there's competition within the economy. But everything we seem to be doing is restricting the productive capacity of the economy, especially small businesses. They're getting hammered by the policies that are out there.
And you just heard Jay Powell comparing the U.S. to global central banks and global situations. He said, well, we have time because we have growth. Well, they have growth. We have growth. It's slowed down considerably from last year, 4.9% growth in the third quarter, all the way to 1.6%. Did he misspeak there? Does he mean we have spending?
Well, Europe is accelerating, and we're kind of slowing down. Maybe it's too much growth for his taste, but on the Europe side, they're doing a better job allowing businesses to produce, and very importantly, their governments are not, their fiscal deficits are not in the same league as ours. The U.S. is projecting fiscal deficits that will stay 6% of GDP out into the future. So I think the market is beginning to pick that up and say, hey, I want to be in the euro, not the U.S. dollar, under these circumstances.
Janet Yellen has become real political, and I want to get your take on what she's doing. Today she's giving a speech in Arizona, and she's going to talk about Trump being a detriment to democracy. I mean, it's an amazing speech, according to Axios, from a Treasury secretary. But the Treasury left its quarterly debt sale unchanged while debuting a new debt buyback program for the first time since 2002. The Treasury says it will sell $125 billion worth of longer-term securities next week at its quarterly refunding auction spanning 3-year, 10-year, and 30-year Treasuries. David, you wrote in February in the Wall Street Journal this: both the Treasury Department and the Fed are borrowing heavily in short maturities, directly competing with small business, and that Congress should use the next debt limit crisis to rewrite and strengthen the debt limit law so that it actually restrains spending and taxation. Tell us more.
Both points are really important. They need, for one, the Treasury shouldn't be politicized this way. That's not the way to handle an election or give confidence in the U.S. economy. There should be lots more comments coming out of the administration that they're going to defend the dollar, they're going to create more productive capacity in the economy, and they're just not saying enough on that. In fact, sometimes you think they want to really go after business profits and take them away. They're talking about raising taxes, a lot of taxes.
$5.5 trillion in taxes in President Biden's new budget.
Her speech should have been all about that, how they're going to avoid having all those taxes come in. So we're on the wrong track that way, and I think there needs to be more on energy, on all the small business lending that could be done. Through good regulatory policy, through good constraint on the spending side of the economy, of the government. They're running, the yield curve is inverted, so Treasury should be borrowing at the longer part of the curve. The number you gave for the auction that they announced yesterday was odd because they're not increasing their long-term borrowing, even though the national debt is going up. In 2023, the Treasury Treasury borrowed $23 trillion. How do they do that? That's because they're rolling over short maturity bills over and over again. That benefits people that have money within the economy, but it doesn't help small businesses at all. They're directly borrowing in the market that small businesses need to fund their inventory, to fund their accounts receivable, to hire new workers. So it's one of the most important decisions that she's making and the government is making right now is where to borrow on the yield curve. And the two decisions we saw yesterday from the Treasury and the Fed were that they're going to borrow at the short end, which harms production.
Well, I mean, and it's also totally political because it will impact markets. And she's trying to, it appears, make sure rates stay low and stocks stay high going into the election.
That's right. You know, trade-off between the bond yields and the PE multiple of the stock market. So you want to keep that propped up, and plus lots of government spending. Try to keep it all held together through the election. One problem with that is gold is going up. You see that, and then other commodities begin to trickle up, and it undercuts the inflation goal that you're trying to get.
You also don't have any independence if you're going to always go back to the talking points of a campaign. And that's what she's going to do in this speech that we understand from Axios that we're getting the clips of. But she's being political even with the auctions.
You know, you can imagine as you get closer and closer to the election, somebody says, well, I don't want a difficult auction. I want to put liquidity into the market, keep everybody happy for the moment. And read the statements yesterday, both from Treasury. They were talking all about liquidity. Hold this thing together for a few more months. And then on the Fed side, they're slowing down the shrinkage of their balance sheet. Well, that means they'll be borrowing more from banks. Banks should be lending to small businesses. Instead, they're lending to the Fed so it can maintain this giant bond portfolio that they were talking about yesterday in their statement.
Yeah, and you know, Jim Grant mentioned that a couple of times the other day when he was joining us here, the founder and editor of Grant's Interest Rate Observer. Do we have that, Emmy, or no? I wanted you to hear what Jim Grant said, because he says, I'm totally expecting them to get political going into the election because they view, you know, Donald Trump as the enemy. Here it is. Watch.
I believe that the Fed itself regards a potential second term for Donald Trump as a clear and present danger to the country.
Mm-hmm. So that's why they'll get involved.
The Fed is politically very much aligned with the Democratic Party. I think the Fed, without even perhaps realizing it is doing something in the way of a political move, would be inclined to read the numbers in a interest rate reduction positive way, with in the back of its mind the threat of another Trump presidency.
Your reaction?
I'm uncomfortable going that far of saying the Fed is just about the election. The Fed has a model that's not working. It's this old model that feels the Fed should be restrictive to get inflation down. They shouldn't be restrictive on the supply side of the economy. So he's interpreting this as you know, a politicized Fed. I think it's more useful for us to think about the Fed has become so powerful within the economy, which I've written directly about the idea that they should be more modest. They're not very good at predicting inflation. They're not good at setting interest rates. And so just be modest about what you can do and what you can't do. And I would rather not go into this issue of it being politicized. They've just been wrong. They had the rates at zero for way too long, and now we're paying the consequences because people are in the wrong part of the yield curve with their commercial real estate is hurt because the Fed kept saying it's going to be 0% interest.
Yeah, and we should point out that Donald Trump appointed Jay Powell to the Federal Reserve. There's that as well. David, it's always great to talk with you.
Really good to see you.
You too. David Malpass joining us.